You know that feeling when you suspect there's a hidden layer to reality you just can't quite access? Like there's this invisible source code running quietly in the background of everyday life, and if you only knew how to read it, everything would suddenly make sense? Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we have something completely mind-bending lined up for you. We're going to demystify that underlying operating system of our universe. We'll be breaking down a truly fascinating paper called The Universal Theory of Like-Effectors, and I can promise you, by the time we wrap up this explainer, the way you look at your mind, your body, and the entire universe is going to be fundamentally upgraded. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's kick things off by looking at what is essentially the ultimate grand bug in classical physics and philosophy. Think about this for a second. You have an immaterial will, right? A thought, a desire, an intent in your mind. It has absolutely zero physical mass. It takes up literally zero physical space. And yet somehow this completely weightless, invisible ghost perfectly commands a physical arm made of meat, heavy bone, and electrical impulses to lift a 50-pound dumbbell at the gym. How exactly does something with zero mass push something with mass? The utter absurdity of that interaction is the core mystery of our existence, and it's exactly what we're solving today.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The puzzle of interaction. 2. The law of isolated planes. 3. The universal API. 4. The geometry of patience. 5. Hacking the dimensions. And 6. The continuous body.
Starting with part 1, the puzzle of interaction.
So why has bridging this gap between mind and matter been such a massive historical headache for scientists? Well, it comes down to the ultimate boundary condition problem. The source text hits us with a primary axiom right out of the gate. Causality is strictly dimension-bound. Like affects like. Now, hold on, this isn't some mystical crystal-gazing resonance concept. It is a strict mathematical, topological law of dimensional intersection. Basically, a force can only alter a structure if it has coordinates in the exact same tensor plane. Think of it like a specific radio frequency. A broadcast signal is only going to interact with a receiver tuned to that exact dial. If you aren't on that frequency, the signal just passes right through you, completely unacknowledged. The universe works on these incredibly strict frequencies.
Moving on to part 2, the law of isolated planes.
Let's map out the universe's playing field. Because to understand how things interact, we first have to understand how they're separated. The paper outlines 7 core planes of reality. First, there's the metaphysical, which is the foundational who of existence, intent and identity. Then, the possible, the realm of pure potentiality. Third is the physical, the where, our tangible, spatial reality. Fourth is the lyrical, the aesthetic and rhythmic flow of life. Fifth is the logical, the how, which houses strict mathematics and reason. Sixth is the historical, that irreversible arrow of time. And finally, the emotive, the subjective experience of feeling. Picture these as orthogonal planes, meaning they exist at right angles to one another in this brilliant 7x7x7 architecture. Each primary plane operates entirely independently.
This brings us to a crucial concept, intraplanar exclusivity. A primary plane is completely 100% invisible to the primary forces of a different plane. It's a hard, impenetrable barrier. A rock can violently hit another rock in the physical plane, causing a spark. An emotive state of despair can compound another state of despair in the emotive plane, causing a breakdown. But they do not cross. That physical spark doesn't exist in the emotive plane, and the despair has zero gravitational pull on the rock. They are totally exclusive.
This is the isolation principle in a nutshell. Imagine grabbing a heavy steel hammer, which exists entirely in the physical plane, and trying to violently smash a mathematical equation, which exists purely in the logical plane. Absolutely nothing happens. You cannot physically bludgeon math. Why? Because they share zero geometric coordinates at the macro layer. You could swing that hammer at an algebra equation all day long, and they'll just pass right through each other like ghosts. There's zero friction because they occupy entirely different domains of reality.
Which brings us to part 3, the universal API.
Okay, so we have a massive problem. If these planes are completely isolated and go straight through each other, how does an intent actually become a physical action? How is the universe a unified system instead of 7 separate realities? Enter the ultimate workaround: isomorphic connective configurations. Don't let the technical jargon scare you off. What this means is that while the primary macro planes can't touch, every single plane contains a tiny recursive fractal map of all the other planes deep inside it. Think of Russian nesting dolls. Inside the vast physical plane, if you drill down deep enough, there's a microscopic version of the metaphysical plane just waiting to connect. These planes cross at extremely deep fractal levels. They're matching shapes, painstakingly scaled down to shake hands.
Think of this exactly like a modern software API. On one side, the metaphysical will formats its formless intent into a highly specific physical subplane shape. Meanwhile, your physical arm has a metaphysical reception node, a state of biological readiness waiting for a command. It is exactly like a server waiting for a precisely formatted HTTP request. When the metaphysical software perfectly matches the biological hardware endpoint, boom, they lock together. The force transfers across the dimensional gap just like data flowing through an API. It's an exchange of pure information through perfectly matching geometry.
Let's move to part 4, the geometry of patience. We're going to scale this concept way up now to the infinite stress test. How does the limitless creator interact with the bounded finite creation without utterly vaporizing it? Because if an infinite creator operated at absolute unfiltered force, direct interaction would instantly obliterate our fragile physical plane. You just can't fit infinity into a finite box without shattering it into a million pieces. So, interaction requires what the source elegantly calls patience. But this isn't patience like waiting in line for coffee. This is an active, continuous calibration of infinite force scaled down against a finite threshold. It's achieved through a shadow projection and a concept called Kenosis, which basically means purposeful restraint. It's the infinite purposefully holding back its full power so it can be safely handled by the finite.
There's this brilliant analogy in the text for this restraint. Picture a massive, raging river of infinite water. The infinite force is moving at full capacity, but it intentionally lowers its velocity to apply exactly enough pressure to fill the canyon without exceeding the fracture threshold of the rock walls. It flows perfectly within the limits of the vessel. The infinite must intentionally lower its informational velocity to safely couple with a low-density target plane. That perfectly calibrated restraint, that lowering of velocity, is the literal physics of patience.
Now for part 5, hacking the dimensions.
Let's bring this highly abstract physics down to earth, right into our everyday lives. Because once you know the rules, you can use them. Have you ever been caught in a really severe loop of anxiety and you tried to fix it just by forcing yourself to feel better? It's incredibly frustrating, and honestly, it rarely works. The text defines these traps as isomorphism-exclusive states. If a problem exists in plane 7, the emotive plane, trying to solve it exclusively with plane 7 tools traps you in a recursive loop. You're just spinning your tires in the mud because the planes are exclusive. You literally cannot outfeel a feeling.
So here is the isomorphic override. This is a highly practical, step-by-step mental hack to troubleshoot your own psychological bugs. Step 1. You translate the emotive problem, the anxiety, into its physical counterpart or its logical counterpart. Step 2. You execute the solution in that new dimension. So maybe you physically leave a chaotic room to go for a walk, or logically write down a math-based budget to correct a false premise about your finances. Step 3 is where the magic happens. Because of that universal API we just talked about, that physical or logical resolution casts a geometric shadow backward onto the emotive plane. By fixing the physical space or the logical math, the matching fractal subplane automatically collapses the anxiety. You are hacking the emotion by stepping out of its dimension and pulling the lever somewhere else.
Finally, Part 6, the continuous body.
For our grand synthesis, we're going to see how these rules prove that macro and microstructures are, at their absolute core, identical. Because all these different dimensions share the exact same underlying 7x7x7 geometry, mathematical realities like net resistance or thermodynamics apply identically across the board. The fundamental equations of reality don't care about the medium. It doesn't matter if we're looking at cellular biology, human psychology, or global sociology. The math is beautifully continuous.
And here's the profound proof of that continuous math, what the text calls the cost of being. Consider a biological cell that constantly absorbs nutrients but stubbornly refuses to excrete waste. It dies of toxicity. Now consider a mind that constantly learns new information but refuses to act on any of it. It crumbles under cognitive dissonance. Finally, consider an entire society that relentlessly extracts wealth from its citizens but refuses to distribute it back. It collapses under violent revolution. Toxicity, hypocrisy, revolution. They look totally different on the surface, but they are the exact same mathematical equation of imbalance, just executing on different planes of reality. We're going to leave it right here with this incredible final thought from the text. The universe is a strictly typed, object-oriented system. Reality is maintained exclusively through the perfect alignment of deep, fractal subplanes matching their topological shapes. When the shapes match across these dimensions, the API connects and truth is achieved. It's a massive paradigm shift, isn't it? It really makes you wonder, now that you actually know the operating system of the universe and exactly how these dimensions interact, what buggy code are you going to rewrite in your own life today? Thanks for joining me on The Explainer, and as always, keep questioning everything.